Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the RocaNews Show. It is Wednesday, October 1st, start of a new month, and also a bleak start to the day with Jane Goodall passing away at 91. Renowned primatologist, revolutionized study of chimps and conservation. So RIP to Jane Goodall, and also RIP to a functioning government. It's a government shutdown. We're going to get to that in a second, and we're going to end with a fascinating conversation on the Riyadh Comedy Festival in Saudi Arabia that's become super controversial. I only say fascinating not because of the value we'll present, but simply because the situation is kind of hilarious and has kind of sparked some fascinating debates on comedians and how they get their money and whether they ought to stand on moral high ground when they perform in front of oppressive governments like Saudi Arabia. So we're going to go to that and also a bit of a Zohran deep dive. But first, the government is shut down. Also, by the way, welcome to Rob. Welcome back, Rob.
Yo.
Thank you for taking over, doing a stellar job producing the show. And all right, so the government shut down. It shut down at midnight. And why did it do that? Well, simply put, to function, the government needs to have spending bills passed. So they need appropriations bills that tell them how to spend the money they've been allocated. And so that can be through a year-long appropriations bill or a continuing resolution, a CR, which is what they're looking to pass now. And that's basically a stopgap law that temporarily extends funding at current levels. But what they're looking to do is pass a bill that will keep the government functioning and running through the start of the fiscal year onward. And the fiscal year begins today. And right now, 900,000 federal workers are furloughed. I talked to a friend of the government this morning. Just as simple as that. They don't know anything else we do. They're not required to go into work. They're not going to get paid. And only essential personnel like the military, like air traffic controllers, like Border Patrol, like the Postal Service, and unfortunately like the IRS, everyone's like, shit, if you're going to close down the government, that could be the one part you should close down. But then non-essential functions, which includes national parks, it includes research grants, it includes regulatory offices, communications offices, passport processing, so much more. That's all halted totally, indefinitely. And it's possible, based on a memo circulated by Russell Vought in the Trump administration, that a lot of these temporarily layoffs will become permanent as like an extension and escalation of the DOGE cuts. So why have the Democrats and Republicans not agreed? Well, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and House Speaker Mike Johnson say it's because the Democrats want to continue to fund illegal immigrant health care. And we can play a clip now of Mike Johnson on George Stephanopoulos' show discussing this on Good Morning America. Here we go. Mike Johnson explaining how the Dems are funding illegal health care.
It does, actually, because what it does is it unwinds the changes that Republicans put into the big, beautiful bill, the big signature legislation that we passed and signed into law on July 4th. That has been very successful in shoring up Medicaid for the people who are actually eligible to receive it. What we did in the bill, and the CBO just verified this 3 weeks ago, the Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan arbiters of everything up here, they said that those provisions have helped to reduce premiums. Why? Because we got ineligible recipients off of Medicaid, illegal aliens, and able-bodied young men who are riding the wagon who are not eligible to be there. Medicaid is intended for specific populations of U.S. citizens. That is young, pregnant women who are down on their luck, the disabled and the elderly. Those resources are being drained from those folks, and so we fixed that. We reduced fraud, waste, and abuse in the program. Chuck Schumer's counterproposal on the CR would reverse that. That is a simple fact. It does, actually.
All right, okay, so basically the Democrats, on the other hand, now, by the way, the Democrats are heavily disputing that. They're saying that the illegal immigrants are ineligible to receive any health care. It's illegal. But Mike Johnson says, well, it was happening anyways, and we took measures to basically prevent it. And the Democrats, on the other hand, Hakeem Jeffries, who's the House Minority Leader, and then Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, they are saying that they want to extend the Affordable Care Act premium subsidies, and that they also want to roll back some of the Medicaid cuts in the big, beautiful bill that was passed on July 4th. So that's the latest on the government shutdown. The Republicans need 60 votes in the Senate to reopen the government. They're at about 55 now. So fingers crossed that the government will reopen. But in the meantime, we are going to go and totally change gears to two other stories in the science realm. We're not going to go too into the intricacies of the science, but we like to cover non-cultural, non-political theater stories as much as we can. And we saw two that are fascinating. The first is that Oregon scientists successfully created human eggs from skin cells. They extracted the nuclei from skin cells and they implanted them into donor eggs that had their nuclei removed, and essentially then all of a sudden they fertilized it with sperm and yada yada. All this, you have an embryo. Now the embryos weren't very sophisticated; most of them didn't last long, but still incredible innovation out of OHSU in Oregon. We found that in the journal Nature, and then the other story, which is related to aging and stem cells, is fascinating, and it's that scientists have engineered super stem cells that reverse multiple signs of aging in monkeys, rejuvenating over half of the tissues that they looked at. So basically, stem cells are key vital parts of our body that repair whatever's damaged in us. And as people get older, they stop working as well, which contributes to aging. And now, and this is, by the way, interesting because they did some of this research based off of hydra, which are tiny jellyfish-like animals that live forever. And they realized that these creatures have a certain protein that makes their stem cells work indefinitely. And they're trying to basically manipulate our own version of that protein to make better stem cells as we get older. So long story short, they tried out these modified stem cells in monkeys, and it's been incredible to see the results. They found that the monkeys aged less, and that a lot of the stem cells that would cause aging and cause a buildup of inflammation, that they had lower inflammation and signs of damage. So we'll be fascinated. I mean, just crazy the shit that's happening now. Stem cells, skin cells into potentially humans if they continue to refine that technology and process. So incredible, out of the world of science. How about that, Rob? What's happening in the world?
In like 10 years, you're going to be able to grow a baby in your kitchen.
That is like insane to think about. Or, what are the implications of aging? If they improve this stem cell procedure and all of a sudden manipulate whatever that protein is, the FOXC3 protein, we could be in a different ballgame. So
Peter Thiel most excited.
Yeah, exactly. He's loving this. Brian Johnson going to stop taking blood from his kid now. I'm kidding. He probably loves it. But all right, so we're going to shift gears again now to Haiti. So for all of you unaware, in 2021, the president of Haiti, Jovenel Moise, was assassinated. You may vaguely recall that headline. You may recall this sort of military leader barbecue who is part of that overthrowing of the government. Well, needless to say, things have been messy in Haiti since, and the UN has most recently voted to replace the current police mission in Haiti with a larger and more aggressive force because the country is currently in total disarray. It hasn't held elections since 2016, and it currently operates with a transitional council without an elected president or legislature. It's basically like the government in Gotham in Dark Knight Rises. Like, it's just totally a mess, totally decentralized. And so what they proposed is that the United States and Panama, who co-sponsored the revolution, that there will be a new gang suppression force, which will be 5 times the number of military personnel and police officers they currently have. In other words, the UN, as led by the United States and Panama, are upping the security and military presence in Haiti to hopefully bring more stability. And ultimately, it's sad to see what's happened in the country. I know my mom's been to Haiti a number of times and had such beautiful people. So hopefully they find a way to forge a lasting stability and bring back elections. So we'll continue to monitor that. Anything to add to it, Rob?
Just when your mom went, was that like a humanitarian mission?
Yeah, humanitarian stuff, service. And Port-au-Prince is one of the poorest big cities in the world, right at the top. So
It's like the definition of a failed state.
Yeah.
Like it's a textbook example.
We had just been to Little Haiti in Miami, where, which is the biggest sort of outpost of Haitian refugees in the world, South Florida. I think half of the Haitians in America live in South Florida.
And the other half are in Springfield, Ohio.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. But they, talking to them, they talk about how the country just been ravaged by, a succession of colonial and powers, and then also local, generals and dictators, and it's just been torn apart. And so, it's had a very, very challenging history, and so fingers crossed that this helps and that they can sort of find a new track. So we'll keep monitoring that. Okay, let's head now to Saudi Arabia. So this is a fascinating situation. Right now in Saudi Arabia, there's an ongoing Riyadh Comedy Festival, and it has drawn some of the biggest names in the comedy world. In fact, I think if you were to write down the biggest comedians, many of them would be, if not, all of your top five would be at that festival. It has Dave Chappelle. It has Bill Burr, Aziz Ansari, Pete Davidson. It has Andrew Schultz, Andrew Santino, Bobby Lee, Whitney Cummings. So many of the biggest names in comedy: Sebastian Maniscalco, Mark Norman, Tom Segura. All these comedians performing in Riyadh before a government that has a number of policies and a history, of course, when it, maybe dismembering an American journalist critical of the government in 2018, Jamal Khashoggi, and having laws that make, homosexuality illegal, where women have few rights in the country, and a super oppressive government that, of course, is spending a ton of money on American media, entertainment, and sports. And this is their latest effort. Now, some comedians, like Tim Dillon, were upfront about it. And he just said, listen, they're paying me a lot of money. He went on Joe Rogan, they paid me over $300,000. He put on his whole Saudi outfit. He had everything, the whole dress, and he ended up getting fired from the festival, so he's gone. And then you had a couple comedians like Shane Gillis, who turned down the invitation, said he would not go. And then you have Mark Maron, or Marone. I don't even know how to say his name. I see him everywhere.
I think it's Maron.
Maron, yeah, Mark Maron. That's what I thought. And I'm like, is that right? Mark Maron had this bit, which I thought was pretty funny. We're going to play now.
There's a Riyadh Comedy Festival. I don't know if you heard about that. This is true. There's a Riyadh, Saudi Arabia Comedy Festival. I mean, how do you even promote that? From the folks that brought you 9/11, 2 weeks of laughter in the desert. Don't miss it.
Yeah, where
I mean, the same guy that's going to pay them is the same guy that paid that guy to bonesaw Jamal Khashoggi and put him in a fucking suitcase. But don't let that stop the yucks. It's going to be a good time. Full disclosure, I was not asked to perform
I love this at the end.
At the Riyadh Comedy Festival, so it's kind of easy for me to take the high road on this one. Easy to maintain your integrity when no one's offering to buy it out,
So, okay, that last part's kind of funny because one comedian that has sort of ruffled people's feathers by being there is Bill Burr. Now, Bill Burr is someone who frequently speaks with a moral authority on issues. And I find Bill Burr to have some of the greatest stand-up specials I've ever seen. I mean, he has some unbelievable bits. His talk show appearances on Conan O'Brien, especially over the years, are just stellar. And he is an extremely funny comedian. But he's also someone, especially recently, who's waded into politics and who's sort of lectured people about the ills of the patriarchy and how broken America is in some ways and how hypocritical we are. And he often gets up on this high horse. And this is from 2010. He has a number of old bits like this where he loves to call out rich people their hypocrisy. here he is going. Then you got Beyonce, right? Miss Independent, Miss I'm a Strong Woman, empowering all the ladies out there. She's out there singing about girl power, telling you to put a ring on it, all that crap. And then what'd she do? She takes $1 million to sing at some private party for Gaddafi's kid, Muammar Gaddafi. You know, the guy who's been blowing stuff up and running a dictatorship forever. Like, what the hell? You're going to jet off to St. Bart, shake your ass for some terrorist dictator's family, pocket $1 million, and then go back to preaching about empowerment? Come on, man. It's hypocrisy of the whole thing. These celebrities will take any gig if the check's big enough. It's like, oh, I'm all about the people. No, some crazy dictator like Mohammed bin Salman waves this stack of cash and then it's, where's my private jet? It's ridiculous. So Bill Burr's done it, and, you know, a number of people have torn them apart. Now, Bill Burr in The Hollywood Reporter, or This is The Hollywood Reporter, he just did a podcast defending his appearance there. And I'd be so curious to hear what you all have to say in the comments about this or in our inbox. But essentially, he's saying, I perform there because they're just like us. They're entitled to comedy. And if you scroll down in this piece a little bit, he talks about, oh, by the way, I didn't even mention that Louis C.K. and Kevin Hart were there. I don't think the Louis C.K. piece would shock anyone. Also all-time comedian. And Kevin Hart, doesn't he have enough money? Like, how much more fucking money can Kevin Hart get? Pardon me. But he's there too. And so Bill Burr defended it, and he was talking about performing in front of them and how they loved comedy. So he said, here he goes, it was great to experience that part of the world and be part of the first comedy festival over there in Saudi Arabia. The Royals loved the show. Everyone was happy. The people that were doing the festival was thrilled. The comedians that I've been talking to were saying, dude, you can feel the audience wanted. They want to see real stand-up. It's a mind-blowing experience. And then he goes on to talk about how there were some people who set rules about what he could say. He said there were only a few. You couldn't make fun of the royals and religion. So, by the way, a comedian posted that online. But so there were restrictions. I mean, for all the comedians who are like, I want to go to places where I can speak openly, they could not speak totally openly. I mean, there were two big rules, and so there were some restrictions.
Not like you know, your leaders or your religion are really big topics.
I know.
Anyway.
I think that what people respect, you know, like the whole comedian speak truth to power and call out hypocrisy. If you're going to do that in Saudi Arabia, those are kind of the elephants in the room, especially the royals part.
Right.
You know, if you're going to be this sort of bold, I call out Trump or I call out the ruling class, whatever it might be, and I stand up for, you know, okay, that's fine. It would be nice if he said something to maybe more overt.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because it's like 2010, Bill Burr was saying that about Beyonce, and like certainly he's not Beyonce now, but comedy 14 years later is huge.
Yeah.
And he's one of the biggest names in comedy.
Exactly.
And it's kind of like, it's like Lord of the Rings. It's like when that ring falls into your hand, yeah, you might just put it on.
Totally. And it's funny because he's been railing, especially on billionaires recently. And talking
Saudis
about,
don't have that much
no,
money, do they?
Someone said he's not okay with white billionaires, but okay with brown trillionaires, which I thought was a great line. But I mean, when I say against billionaires, I'm not talking about like, oh, there's a little bit too much of a concentration of wealth in Silicon Valley. No, he's talking about getting rid of them, the pests they are.
He was screaming "Free Luigi." Like,
yes,
times.
He was always sort of, if not endorsing. No, he endorsed Luigi. And certainly shot down the harshest criticisms of him. So, I mean, I just think the Bill Burr example really, really jumped out. And listen, I think there are a few answers about, you know, whether these comedians should be there. Number one is take the Shane Gillis route or Stabby and just say, listen, y'all are bad government. I'm not going to perform there no matter how big the check size is. Then there's another option where you just do it and don't really say anything or say, come on, they like comedy. They're people. Yeah, they've done bad things. We've done bad things too. They kind of Bill Burr. And then there's another route, which is saying, I'm doing it because the check size is huge.
The Tim Dillon route.
The Tim Dillon route. And I kind of prefer personally the first and the third. And I know the Roca audience does too. In our 20 questions in the newsletter last week, we gave basically, it was a ratings edition. So we gave 20 different categories. You know, one of them was like Jimmy Kimmel. One was AOC. One was like Ted Cruz. And we had everybody, you know, rate different things. And then some were like hot dogs or, waffles versus pancakes, that kind of thing. So some were like totally lighthearted. And, you know, we had the single least popular thing. And we listed stuff like, expired milk or something. The least popular thing was celebrities using their platforms to make political statements. So the single less popular than AOC, less popular than Ted Cruz. So there was no political angle to it. In fact, both Ted Cruz and AOC were pretty unpopular. So all that's to say, we're not alone in sort of going after this. And then, I may go more into this tomorrow, but yesterday, I believe it came out yesterday, one of the few journalists in the media, in the mainstream media, the legacy media, that I personally admire is a guy named James Pogue, because he just covers topics so well. And he recently wrote a monstrous piece in Vanity Fair. I mean, you can just see from the sidebar of how little this scrolling thing is. I mean, this thing is a super long piece. I read it last night. And there are a couple things worth pointing out in the piece. I'm not even going to ask for to find certain parts of it because it's just so long. By the way, Emily Ratajkowski spoke to the piece. I mean, James Pogue gets crazy access. He's from Cincinnati. I think he dropped out of college and worked out west for a while. But he noticed a few things spending time with Zohran, doing some calls, going to some events. Number one is he said there is this kind of religious fervor around Zohran that he hasn't seen in his life. And this is a guy who's covered some of the biggest politicians closely. Now, Trump is one obvious example, and some might say Obama as well. But he said the way he sees people take their shoes off and sprint after Zohran when they encounter him in New York, or the way that people will... their jaws will drop on the street and they'll ask him to sign anything. And the reverence people have for Zohran, it's unique. And he makes a point. He represents something larger. And then he makes two other more specific points. Yeah, they're AOC, Bernie, and Zohran in New York.
The new squad.
And the difference is I think this squad has a lot more legs, nationally. Totally. Ilhan Omar's unlikable, I think, to most people.
I can see the two on the left here as 2028 or 2032 running mates.
I mean, it's inside the Democratic Party are two wolves right now. It's either that side or the more moderate Dem side, like Newsom and Pete Buttigieg. I personally think the issue they have is, the Palestine issue plays super well for Zohran here. I think that doesn't play as well in the Midwest. Not that they're, Israel's lost support, but I still think he's going to have issues with a lot of his defund the police stuff. I think that really hurts him. But still, James Pogue makes the point that in all the most heated interviews, in every tense environment he's in, he always goes back to affordability. Always. And he has that kind of discipline as a campaigner that is rare. Always going back to affordability.
The economy, stupid.
It's economy, stupid. And in New York especially, where everything's just so expensive and rent has... I just saw a chart of the most expensive cities now versus, I think, in 2010 or 2012 by rent. And New York's rent is up in 10 years by 33%. It's just way up. It's the most expensive rent in the world. Here's the latest rent chart.
And then number 2 is Jersey City, which is basically just New York.
Yeah, that's hilarious. That Jersey City's right ahead of San Francisco. And it's well ahead of London, Singapore. So in the last 10 years, I mean, the rent is just insane. I mean, 10% up in 1 year. This is for one-bedroom medium rent. You're paying $4,200. Even people who come from trust funds or make good money it's crazy. And anyone who has a middle-class job is just totally priced out. He knows that. And he keeps going back to his big 3 policies of free buses, freezing rent, and grocery stores run by the city. So he has this sort of obsessive focus on affordability, and he also has this galvanizing issue of Palestine. He talks a lot about now James Pogue does point out, and he doesn't editorialize much in this piece, but he talks about how so much of what Zohran says is fluff, and when people really drill him on a specific policy and its implications, he won't get into the details, or even things like, okay, you say it's illegal for Trump to deport people from New York City. What are you going to do when ICE is in town? Are you going to physically fight them? And he just we're going to consider what's open to the law. He'll do that kind of thing. And then when it comes to like the implications of millionaires are going to leave, businesses are going to leave, he sort of says, I don't want them to leave, and it'll be affordable for everyone, and that'll make everyone happy. And I don't think that'll happen. And every time he's pressed, he goes into the fluffy stuff. But yeah, the Palestine stuff is huge for him. I mean, his parents fled from Eastern Africa when they were part of this Indian diaspora in Eastern Africa, and when the Ugandan president in 1972, he announced that they all had to leave. This sort of upper class Indian caste, they all fled, and they shipped their stuff to first London, and they ended up in America. And so Zohran's always had this in between of like in Uganda he said he's Indian, in India he says he's Ugandan, and then in America he's both. And so in India he says he's a Muslim, like that's his outlier thing.
A minority everywhere.
A minority everywhere, exactly. And so he has this identity issue, but then he said in New York, a lot of people are like that and have complicated identities, and there's a huge Muslim presence, and he's turned that into political operation where, that used to be kind of a decentralized thing, and they're huge Muslims. I think something like close to 1 million Muslims in New York now. So he has led this sort of coalition of Asians, South Asians, of Muslims, of people who live in Queens, of people who live in East Brooklyn, and galvanize them around issues of affordability, but also around the Palestinian struggle, and has been unapologetic about it. And when you look back at his history, starting an SJP chapter at Bowdoin College in Maine, where he went for undergrad, liberal arts college, he was an activist for Palestinian cause. And a lot of tweets have come back to bite him. And James Pogue makes the point in this piece that I thought was interesting as well. His policies are more moderate than his critics would like to admit, and more moderate than his supporters would like to admit. And I thought that was a great line, because it's true. When you actually look at what he believes, it's not what he was saying in 2020, or probably what he says behind closed doors, and maybe just being pragmatist. But like he talked about the NYPD is inherently anti-black and anti-queer, and that we ought to defund the police. And he's spoken very ill of American politics and the American institution, in a way is still kind of like treats his Americanism as a byproduct. So he has all these sort of, radical past lines. Like even, I remember this old interview, this is before he was on anyone's radar. He was talking about his experience at, I think, the Bronx School of Science, which is like a very prestigious test that you have to test into it. And he was talking to someone who basically does a Bronx Science alumni podcast. And he talked about this one teacher who who knew how to go after him because he was a former IDF soldier. And there's the line. Okay, he says, "One day he tailed me." I mean, keep in mind, this guy's a graduate of the IDF. He's tailed brown guys for a long time. He's good at it, right? Tailed my ass. That was the first 20. And then in college, he has a number of articles about white privilege, and you can look him up. So this guy's no middle-of-the-line Democrat, but he's really moderated, whether out of pragmatism or he just deals with the realities of politics. Now, I will say this, his cabinet, oh my goodness, some of the people like his housing advisor, they're all in their 20s and 30s, by the way. His housing advisor is against all private property. Zohran Mamdani has talked about eliminating private, ownership in the past. So, I mean, he's got that background, whether he believes it or not. It will.
Can I ask you a question about
Yes,
this?
sir.
I think that a lot of what he wants to do he's not going to be able to do because of Kathy Hochul, because a lot of stuff has to go through Albany. And as far as launching himself into a national platform, that might play to his advantage. Say, well, I couldn't do it in city government. Let me run for federal office. But I'm curious, this whole, this socialism cabinet, like, do you think he's moving the Overton window, or do you think the Overton window has moved naturally to allow it for Zohran Mamdani? Like, who's the chicken and who's the egg?
That's a great question. I think I think my first thought is it's a bit of both. I think that it's hard to say that he's like this, watershed moment when we had Bernie, who in 2016 and 2020, if not for the interventions of the DNC, may have been the Democratic nominee.
Definitely.
So I think like it's been trending this way. I think that, people always, much smarter economists will talk about how this period in history mirrors the 1920s and the sort of enormous wealth inequality that existed then, and also in the like 1870s, post-World War, post-Civil War. Yeah, exactly. When you adjust for inflation, like 10 of the 75 richest people in world history were born between 1830 and 1840, and it was because of they all made their wealth in the 1870s. So like any period where there becomes this explosion of wealth and this sort of revolution, and so there will be like a socialism backlash. Now the question is, like George Will recently said, the conservative writer, he said that this happens from time to time, and people see his tenure as mayor go up in flames, and then they'll learn their lesson, or will he actually do a smart deployment of democratic socialism that is effective? I think he's definitely shown, though, around the country that you can be a socialist and be against all odds, because like Bernie at least has toned down a lot of the past stuff, whereas Zohran's like, 3 years ago I said defund the police, and and I'm still, by the way, I would arrest Netanyahu. Like he's saying things that there's not a single tweet that could come out against him that would tank his campaign at this point.
Now, I do think it's worth pointing out, I think the moment that he went from long shot to almost an inevitability was that city mayor debate when every mayoral candidate was asked, what would be your first state visit? First of all, why is that a question?
I know.
For a mayor. But they all said, I would go to Israel. One guy said I would go to Israel and Ukraine to get brownie points. And Zohran Mamdani was like, I'm staying here. Like, I'm the mayor of New York. And that I thought was telling.
I love that. Israel and Ukraine. And now I'm going to go to Haiti. Now that we have the new deployment, just stop.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, he does have a track record. Like, he was very loath to condemn, like, globalize the Intifada as a slogan. He sometimes avoids it, condemning Hamas, all that.
Yeah.
I think some of that will hurt him long term. But he is kind of like a New York first mayor in his rhetoric. Even when people press him, like even in this article, he always goes back to issues of New Yorkers. And the last thing I'll say about this piece that I think is interesting is it starts with an anecdote. Actually, if you go to the top of the piece, it starts with an amazing anecdote that kind of gives a historical parallel to Mamdani. At first, you don't even know it's that, but here it is. All right, this top. Okay, it was the primary fight that changed the course of the Democratic Party. A craggy-faced master of insider politics squared off against a suave and handsome upstart whose youth and relative inexperience masked the fact that he had a very hard-nosed understanding of machine politics. The older man was confident. He sat back and quietly logged support from party dons, donors, insiders. He would step in when the moment was right. By the way, at this point, I'm thinking craggy-faced, quietly logging support from party dons, donors, insiders. I'm thinking this is Cuomo, but it continues. The younger man campaigned at a pace that seemed to test his physical limits. He and his network of supporters badgered every ward healer and union boss who would listen, yada, yada. He'd also have a fervent base of support from a block of poor immigrants, and continues. And then it goes, by the time the general election was around, it was hard to imagine that anyone else could have been the nominee. It was 1960, the year Lyndon Baines Johnson lost the Democratic presidential primary to JFK. So he, in the early parts of this piece, draws a parallel between JFK and Zohran, and I thought that was fascinating.
They did that with Obama too, didn't they?
They did, obviously in my younger political years there, but I remember that comparison of like young guy who just shattered a barrier. For JFK, it was the Catholic thing, and then for Obama, obviously the first black president, and then, Zohran, I think it's just also like the you have to see it effect, which is rare in politics. So, like, nobody would say that about Lindsey Graham. Like, you have to see him on the campaign trail, or Gretchen Whitmer. Fascinating time. The Riyadh Comedy Festival. Honestly, if Roca were invited to like to provide news, we'd look at the dollar amount, like before we say no. Anyways, fascinating show. Rob, anything to add?
I do think that we left out the fact that Pete Davidson, whose dad died in 9/11, is going to perform in Saudi Arabia. I think 18 of the 19 hijackers in 9/11 were Saudi Arabian.
That is
worth noting.
Insane to think about. I mean, I forgot that he was going. Dude, that's crazy. Well, on that note, we will end today's show. See you in Riyadh. And thank you so much for tuning in. Really, really appreciate it. Billy's going to be back tomorrow, although Rob is going to be a regular feature on the show, both in his capacity as a journalist and also running the ship here behind the scenes. So thank you, Rob.
Subscribe. Tell your friends. Like the video.
Tell your friends. All right. Have a great one. Happy October. Happy Shutdown Day. Bye.